All right. I'm going to try this again here. Having a few little problems with my microphone, but I'm going to speak up and hope I get it on tape this time. I want to talk about uh, uh, the fourth step and taking an inventory of resentments. And this video is people that are involved in anonymous programs, and there's value in doing that. Uh, and as you if you're interested in this video, you probably know the big book has uh, uh, a, a way of taking inventory, making a resentment list, and that's all well and good, but it presupposes one thing, and that's that you know what your resentments are. And my experience is you don't always know what your resentments are. Now, you may be thinking, Uh, well, that's a pretty weird person that's resentful and doesn't know that he's resentful. Well, okay, but I think it might be a lot more common than you think. Um, in recent times, let me tell you what I mean. Traumas become more and more recognized as one of the uh, causative factors in addiction. And that was certainly true of my case. Now, here's what happens, and especially more so in childhood, I think, than adults. And the psychologists have a name for it. They call it um, disassociation. They call it post-traumatic amnesia, and some people call it repressed memories. It's all the same to me. And so here's what happens. You go to make an inventory list and you write your resentments down, and you may be able to write some down like I was able to. But the deep-seated resentments that you have, um, you can't write them down because you're not aware that you have them. Now, I can talk about this now. My mother's dead, so um, I can talk about it. And if any of my remaining family members see the video, I'll just say, well, that's the way it was. And not trying, I'm just telling you what happened. Um, I was beaten when I was about 5 years old. I was beaten more than once, but one time really bad. And that's a root trauma. Now, a little child does not have any way to respond to cruelty except to respond, at least most don't, except to respond with resentment. I guess if you're Jesus, you wouldn't, but we don't come into the world the same way. As a friend of mine used to like to say, we come into the world and the world comes into us. So as a little child, if you're beaten or if you're molested, and I'm sad to say that, sorry to say that that's um, very common. And you're a young child. What I did, it was so traumatic to me, and I couldn't deal with the reality of it. That what I did was just how I express it is I pushed it out of my mind. I just made it go away in my mind. And so the whole incident was repressed. But it doesn't mean that the resentment was not still there, buried in my subconscious. It just wasn't in my conscious mind. So I couldn't do an inventory list and write down my resentments, most serious ones, because I couldn't access those memories, if you're following me. And I don't think that's all that uncommon, really. And it took me many, 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 many years of being sober, decades actually, before I was able to do it. And the reason I'm making the video is in the hopes of maybe helping you or somebody you know. And so you can, if you can't access the memories, what can you do? Well, the memories can come back, but they may take time. And I spent a lot of time in quiet meditation or prayer. And over the decades, these memories, these traumatic things started to come back to me. And I also started to notice this. And this was probably almost close to 35 years sober or 33 years, something like that. When I was around the trauma source, I started to become aware of the resentment. I would be around my mother and I would see her, and even though these things had happened really 50 years earlier, and she wasn't doing anything now, I'd look at her and I started to become aware of it was very subtle, very, very subtle thing. And you become aware of it in the moment. It's like a very subtle, seething, um, quiet, quiet resentment. And I started to become aware of it. And I started to realize, oh, and there would be other times you see it in the now too. I remember I was in a barber shop and a guy came in with his young daughter, and I looked at this. He came in with this innocent young girl, and I started thinking to myself, how could anybody beat an innocent young girl like that? And I started to become aware of it again. And when I talked about it, what happened, the resentment would come out. So I started to become aware of it, but it took a long, long, long time. So you might you might look in the now is where you'll discover it when you're possibly when you're around your trauma sources. And then after you discover it, what do you do about it? Because I discovered that once I became aware of it, I couldn't get rid of it. I didn't know what to do about it. And I'll tell you what happened to me. Um, somebody counseled me to do this, and even though this person himself has some very serious problems, he was right about this. He told me, he said, ask God to show you that your mother couldn't help herself. And frankly, that seemed a bit crazy to me at the time. But I tried everything else. I tried yelling and screaming to get it out and all that. Nothing worked. So that's exactly what I did. And shortly after I prayed that sincere prayer, all of a sudden came flooding back into my minds times when, as a very young boy, I don't know, 7, 8, whatever, I'd been very cruel to another boy. Came back to my memory. In other words, I had become like I hated. I had become cruel like my mother was cruel to me. And I remember at the time, I remember so clearly, it came back to me that I just felt like something was taking me over, and uh, I was helpless and something just took me over. And when that happened, when that prayer was answered, I realized, oh, oh, my mom couldn't help herself any more than I could help myself. And that's all that it took. When you realize that, you're standing in their shoes and you can have compassion on the person that harmed you. So that's the story of how I I the memories had to come back, and then I went through a process, and I was able to give them up. And we don't forgive. We're not God. We can't forgive. Only God can forgive, and His Son Jesus can forgive. But we can't forgive. Our forgiveness is letting go of the resentment. And when I realized that she was helpless, she couldn't help herself any more than I could help myself, I let it go. Now, that may fly in the face of everything you've ever been taught, because you might have some ideas like, oh well, but what about free will? She had the free will to do. Uh, she chose to do evil, and you had the free will to do it. Okay, well, you can believe that if you want, but it's not like that. When you're in that lost state, there is no free will. You're a slave. And actually, there is a kind of a free will where you there is a kind of free will where you choose you choose the salvation of God. God doesn't force himself on us, but when you're in that lost state, you're a slave. And if you look into scriptures, that's what it says. It says, all who sin are slaves. So there you go. You may think I'm crazy. You may not think I'm crazy. You can put whatever comments you want down there. Um, I do not tolerate rude, insulting, degrading comments. So if you intend to make that kind of comment, don't even bother doing it, because I will just delete it. And I really hope you find some value in that. And yeah, I I'll just sum it up by saying I don't think most of us realize how these traumatic events in our childhoods shape the course of our lives. I just don't think it's well recognized. All right. God bless.